Emergency alert. The museum keeps a portrait that changes faces. I thought it was a trick of the light until she blinked. Her eyes followed me across the room. And when I turned away, the portrait wasn't the same anymore.
The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel driveway as I approached Ravenscroft Manor, the great Victorian estate looming like a dark sentinel against the bruised twilight sky. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the chill of early autumn creeping beneath my coat, despite the fire that had been lit in the hearth of the manor's grand entrance hall. Ravenscroft was a place spoken of in hushed tones among my colleagues, a repository of cursed paintings, each rumored to trap a secret or a sorrow within its brushstrokes. Yet it was one particular portrait, whispered about in legends and academic circles alike, that had drawn me here. As the carriage rolled to a stop, I stepped down onto the cold stone steps, my boots clicking sharply in the stillness. The manor's imposing facade was draped in shadow, the intricate Gothic arches and mullioned windows casting long, eerie silhouettes. A raven's cry pierced the silence, a stark reminder of the manor's namesake and the darkness woven into its history. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of aged wood, wax polish, and something faintly metallic like the lingering echo of blood long shed. The grand entrance hall stretched before me, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow me with quiet judgment. My fingers brushed over the polished mahogany banister as I ascended the sweeping staircase, the velvet curtains muting the outside world to a distant murmur. Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper, awaited me in the gallery. Her graying hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, missed nothing. She greeted me with a warm but cautious smile, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Miss Graves, welcome to Ravenscroft. The manor has been expecting you, though I dare say it has a way of revealing itself in ways one might not expect." I nodded, keenly aware of the weight behind her words. The manor was alive with secrets, and I was here to uncover them. The gallery itself was a cavernous room, walls draped with heavy crimson damask and lit by flickering sconces that threw dancing shadows across the clustered paintings. Among them hung the portrait that had become the obsession of so many, a woman of striking pallor and dark eyes, whose gaze seemed to shift when unobserved. Tonight, as I stood before it, the candlelight flickered, and for a heartbeat, the face changed, eyes narrowing, lips parting in a ghost of a smile before settling back into stillness. I reached for my sketchbook, hands trembling slightly as I traced the outline of the visage, attempting to capture the elusive changes. The brushstrokes wavered beneath my pencil, as if alive, resisting confinement. A sudden draft swept through the room, cold and unwelcome, carrying with it a whisper of forgotten voices and half-remembered lies. The shadows deepened, pooling at my feet and climbing the walls. I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, the manor watching, waiting. "They say the paintings here hold more than pigment and canvas," Margaret murmured beside me, her breath warm against my ear. "They hold the past, its sins, its secrets. And some truths are better left undisturbed." Her warning only fueled my resolve. I had come to Ravenscroft seeking knowledge, to catalogue its collection, and perhaps lay to rest the restless spirits trapped within. But already I sensed that this was not merely an academic pursuit. The manor's shadows were alive, and the lies frozen in time were beginning to thaw. As night deepened, I wandered the halls, each step echoing with the weight of history and the promise of revelation. The flickering candlelight played tricks on my eyes. Faces in the portraits seemed to shift, shadows lengthening into forms just beyond sight. Restless, I found myself pacing beneath the watchful gaze of ancestors long gone, the silence broken only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock marking the slow passage of time. In that moment, I understood. Ravenscroft was not simply a house of art and history. It was a labyrinth of secrets, the shifting canvas of a story waiting to be told. And the first, Eleanor Graves, was to be its reluctant witness. The night stretched before me, thick with anticipation and dread. Somewhere within these walls, the truth awaited, a truth that would challenge my every belief, and perhaps my very sanity. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying my breath. Tomorrow, the investigation would begin. But tonight, I was alone with the shadows, and the portrait that refused to remain still. And so my journey into Ravenscroft Manor began, beneath flickering candlelight and the watchful eyes of painted ghosts, where every brushstroke whispered a lie, frozen in time, waiting to be unraveled. The heavy oak door groaned softly as I closed it behind me, the echo of its protest reverberating through the vast, shadowed halls of Ravenscroft Manor. My footsteps, muffled by the thick Persian rugs, traced a path toward the gallery where the manor's notorious collection of paintings hung, each canvas a silent sentinel in the gathering gloom. The air was thick with the scent of aged varnish and wood smoke, a perfume that seemed as ancient as the manor itself. The portrait awaited me at the far end of the gallery, its frame ornate and gilded, catching the last rays of dwindling daylight. I had heard whispers of its curse since I accepted this commission, but skepticism had been my steady companion. Now, standing before it, the face in the canvas seemed almost alive, eyes glinting with an uncanny spark beneath the thick layers of oil paint. I settled into a high-backed chair, my sketchbook poised on my lap, candlelight flickering nearby. As the manor clock began its slow, sonorous toll, I felt a shiver crawl along my spine. 1 chime, 2, 3. With each stroke of the bell, the shadows deepened, swallowing the corners of the room. At the final toll, the face in the portrait wavered. A subtle distortion rippled across the painted skin. The delicate brushstrokes seemed to ripple and shift. Features blurred as if the very essence of the subject was melting beneath the surface. The sharp jawline softened, the restless eyes dimmed and then brightened anew, transforming into a visage I did not recognize, yet one that tugged at some hidden chord in my memory. I gasped softly, clutching my sketchbook tight. The rational part of my mind recoiled in disbelief, but the relentless curiosity that had driven me this far refused to be silenced. I began to sketch rapidly, capturing the fleeting changes in charcoal and ink, the candlelight dancing across the pages like a pulse. Outside, the wind whispered through the gnarled branches of ancient oaks, their silhouettes scratching at the windows like skeletal fingers. The manor settled into its nocturnal rhythm, a symphony of creaks, distant footsteps, and the occasional sigh of a shutter. With trembling hands, I turned from the portrait to the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and dust-heavy shelves. The flickering candlelight barely held back the darkness as I rifled through records and ledgers, searching for any mention of the painting or the family it portrayed. Cryptic notes in faded letters hinted at tragedies long buried beneath the manor's opulent veneer. The hours slipped by unnoticed. I was immersed in a world where brushstrokes whispered secrets and shadows concealed half-truths. Every creak and groan of the manor seemed amplified, a reminder that I was not alone in this pursuit. The line between observer and participant blurred. The painting was no longer a silent witness, but an active player in a story I was only beginning to understand. As dawn threatened the horizon, I returned to the gallery, exhausted yet unable to look away. The canvas had settled back into a semblance of stillness, but the faces I had seen lingered in my mind's eye, each one a thread in a tapestry of lies frozen in time. Questions churned relentlessly. Who were these people? What crime had been concealed within the shifting images? And why had I, Eleanor Graves, been drawn into this web of shadows and deception? The manor seemed to breathe around me, its walls alive with the weight of untold stories. I knew that this night was but the first step down a path from which there might be no return. Yet, despite the creeping dread, my resolve hardened. I would uncover the truth behind the shifting canvas, no matter the cost. Outside, the first pale light of morning crept through stained glass, casting fractured colors upon the floor. The portrait hung silently, its secret intact for now, but I was certain it would not remain so for long. The heavy oak door creaked solemnly as I pushed it open, entering the manor's archive, a cavernous room that smelled of dust, aged paper, and secrets long buried. The muted light filtered through stained glass windows, casting fractured colors upon the rows of leather-bound volumes and brittle journals that lined towering shelves. It was a sanctum of history, with a Ravenscroft family's past seemed etched into every page, waiting patiently for the right eyes to read it. Jonathan Pierce, a local historian whose quiet demeanor masked a fierce intellect, had agreed to assist me with my research. He was already absorbed in a tome when I arrived, spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his fingers tracing the faded ink with reverence. I set my satchel down and began removing other volumes that might hold clues about the portraits and their strange, shifting nature. I found references to a scandal, Jonathan murmured after some time, his voice low and cautious. It seems the Ravenscrofts were not always the stoic family they appear to be. There are mentions of a tragedy, a crime, perhaps, that was carefully concealed. I leaned closer, the flickering candlelight throwing our shadows long and wavering against the cold stone walls. What kind of crime? He hesitated before producing a yellowed diary, its cover cracked and worn. This belonged to a servant, it seems. The entries are cryptic, but they hint at betrayal and death. As I leafed through the delicate pages, the ink faded, but the emotions were palpable. Fear, sorrow, and anger bled from every word, painting a portrait more vivid and damning than any canvas. The diary spoke of a woman, Isabel Ravenscroft, whose fate was entwined with the manor's darkest hour. The more I read, the more the manor itself felt alive, as if the shadows lurking in its corners listened intently to each whispered secret. Outside the archive, distant footsteps echoed, and I caught sight of Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper, exchanging a tense glance with Lord Alastair Ravenscroft. Their conversation was hushed, but charged, words clipped and heavy with unspoken threats. Margaret's warm eyes flickered with conflict, her loyalty to the family battling against a hidden pain I had yet to unravel. Lord Alastair, tall and gaunt, bore the weight of centuries in his pallid gaze, a man driven by duty yet haunted by guilt. Their presence underscored the fragile balance within the manor's walls, a web of secrets that threatened to ensnare anyone who dared pry too deeply. Returning my attention to the diary, I found a passage that chilled me. The brush conceals what words cannot. Shadows hold the lies we dare not speak. It was a motif I had sensed since my arrival, the interplay of brushstrokes and shadow concealing more than mere artistry. The portrait that haunted the manor was not just a painting. It was a repository of frozen lies, a silent witness to a crime that time refused to erase. As dusk settled, the manor transformed. The fading light deepened the shadows, and the flickering gas lamps cast eerie halos along the corridors. I found myself drawn once again to the shifting portrait. Tonight, the face that stared back was unfamiliar, yet hauntingly familiar, a mosaic of features that seemed to change with every blink. I sketched feverishly, trying to capture the elusive transformations, each line a desperate attempt to hold on to truth. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable tension that set my nerves alight. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tolled solemnly, marking the passage of time that seemed increasingly fluid within these walls. Later, as I retired to my room, the manor's silence pressed in around me. I could not shake the feeling that eyes unseen followed my every step, that whispers of the past threaded through the very fabric of the building. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with questions and half-formed theories. What was the true story behind Isabel Ravenscroft? How did the portraits encode a crime so carefully hidden? And who among the manor's inhabitants guarded these secrets with such fervor? The answers lay somewhere in the shadows, waiting for me to uncover them if the manor would allow me to do so. As the night deepened, I resolved to press on. The whispers of the past were growing louder, and I could no longer ignore their call. But with every secret uncovered, the danger seemed to grow, and I was beginning to understand that some lies, though frozen in time, had a way of reaching out, dark and cold, to claim the present. The heavy oak door of the servants' wing creaked shut behind me, muffling the distant murmur of the main house and enclosing me in a world of quiet shadows and the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. I had sought out Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper, after a day spent wandering the manor's labyrinthine corridors, poring over dusty ledgers and riddle letters that hinted at histories I could barely begin to untangle. There was something about Margaret, her steady presence, the careful way she moved through the dim spaces, that suggested she held keys to secrets the walls themselves whispered about in hushed tones. I found her in the kitchen, a sanctuary of warmth amid the manor's chill. The room was cast in flickering candlelight, the flames dancing along peeling wallpaper and the polished surfaces of copper pots hanging above the hearth. She was arranging a modest tray, a porcelain teapot steaming beside a small plate of scones, her hands deft but betraying a subtle tremor when she caught sight of me. "Miss Graves," she greeted softly, her voice a blend of formality and something more intimate. "I wasn't expecting you here so early." "The manor's history isn't letting me rest," I admitted, accepting the offered cup. The tea was strong, a comforting bitterness that seemed to chase away the cold creeping into my fingers. Margaret's eyes, sharp and unyielding, studied me for a moment before she spoke. "You're looking for answers, aren't you?" I nodded, wary yet hopeful. "More than anything. But the more I find, the more tangled everything becomes." She sighed, a sound heavier than the fire's crackle. "This house has been many things to many people. A refuge, a prison, a tomb. The paintings, the stories, they all carry burdens." I reached into my satchel and pulled out a sketchbook, flipping to the pages where I had captured the subtle distortions of the portrait that had consumed my nights. "Do you know about this painting? The one that changes." Margaret's gaze flicked to the drawings, then back to me. "I've seen it, more than once. And I've heard whispers old tales of sorrow and sin tied to that canvas." Her voice grew quieter, almost a whisper itself. Isabel Ravenscroft was not just a name on a portrait. She was a woman caught in the cruel tides of this family's history. I leaned forward, the firelight casting shadows that seemed to curl around us like specters. "What happened to her?" Margaret hesitated, fingers tightening around her cup. "It's not a story easily told, but you deserve to know, at least some of it." She recounted snippets of a life marked by love and betrayal, of a secret that had been buried beneath layers of varnish and silence. Her words painted a picture of a woman trapped by circumstance and a family desperate to preserve its reputation at any cost. As Margaret spoke, I sensed an undercurrent of pain beneath her composed exterior, a personal weight she bore in tandem with the manor itself. There was a tremor in her voice when she mentioned the original crime, a hint that her loyalty to the Ravenscrofts was not without conflict. The rain began tapping gently against the kitchen window, a soft percussion that underscored the gravity of her confession. I opened my sketchbook again, capturing the lines of her face, the faintest furrow of worry, the resilience in her eyes that refused to be dimmed by decades of secrets. "Why tell me this now?" I asked quietly. Margaret's gaze met mine steadily. "Because the past is restless, Miss Graves, and sometimes it needs a witness. Someone who can see the truth beneath the brushstrokes." There was a moment's silence, filled only by the fire's crackle and the rain's soft rhythm. Then she reached into a pocket of her worn apron and produced a small, faded photograph. The edges were curled, the image blurred by time, but it was unmistakable. A young woman with haunting eyes, the same as in the portrait that haunted my nights. "Isabel," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was more than the painting. And her story is not finished." I took the photograph reverently, feeling the weight of history settle heavily between us. The fragile trust that had begun to form felt as delicate as the brittle paper in my hands, yet it was a lifeline in the midst of the manor's suffocating shadows. As I left the kitchen, the warmth of the room faded behind me, replaced once more by the chill of the corridors and the watchful eyes of the portraits. But now I carried with me a shard of truth, a secret that would both illuminate and complicate the path ahead. The night deepened, and with it, my resolve. Trust was scarce within these walls, but I could not unravel the mystery alone. Margaret's secret was a thread I would follow, no matter where it led, even if it meant confronting the darkest corners of Ravenscroft Manor and the lies frozen forever in its brushstrokes. And as the manor settled into uneasy silence, I could not shake the feeling that I was no longer merely an observer, but a participant in a story that was far from over. The shadows were watching, always watching, and I was beginning to understand that some secrets were not just kept, they lived. The candle flickered once again as I closed my sketchbook and prepared for the night ahead. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more discoveries. But for now, I held on to the fragile hope that Margaret's guarded words might be the key to unlocking the portrait's secret. And perhaps, in time, the cursed canvas would finally reveal its truth. But deep down, I knew the path would be fraught with danger. Trust was a rare commodity in Ravenscroft Manor, and every revelation came at a cost. The game was afoot, and I was no longer sure if I could win without losing a part of myself. The heavy chimes of the grandfather clock echoed through the vast, dim gallery, marking the approach of midnight with solemn authority. I stood alone, the faint scent of aged oil paint and wax mingling in the cold air, as I fixed my gaze on the portrait that had so captivated and haunted me since my arrival at Ravenscroft Manor. Flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the walls, the wavering flames struggling to hold back the oppressive darkness that seemed to breathe from the very brushes that had painted this cursed canvas. For nights, I had resisted the temptation to watch the portrait closely at the stroke of midnight, fearing what I might see. Yet tonight, driven by a restless curiosity that gnawed at my resolve, I positioned myself before the painting with sketchbook in hand, ready to capture any change, any subtle shift in the subject's countenance. The manor around me was silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the whisper of wind against leaded glass. As the clock began its final toll, 1, 2, 3, my breath caught in my throat. The painted figure's eyes, once steady and somber, flickered with an unearthly light. The brushstrokes rippled, as if stirred by an unseen hand, and the face began to shift. Features blurred and reformed, the haunting blue eyes grew wider, lips parted in a fragile, terrified expression. I sketched feverishly, heart pounding in time with the slow, agonizing transformation. The woman before me was no longer the same. When the final chime faded, the portrait revealed a new face, one that bore a striking resemblance to the descriptions I had read in the manor's scattered documents. This was Isabel Ravenscroft, the former mistress of the manor, whose tragic story was whispered in fearful tones. But her visage here was not merely a likeness. It seemed alive with untold sorrow and secrets. The room's shadows thickened as if drawn to the revelation, their inky tendrils encroaching upon the flickering candlelight. I could feel the weight of generations pressing down upon me, binding me to this place and its painful history. Determined to understand this spectral display, I retreated to the manor's library, a cavernous room lined with ancient tomes and dusty ledgers. My fingers traced the cracked leather spines, until I stumbled upon a hidden compartment within one of the shelves. There, concealed beneath decades of dust, lay a slender, leather-bound diary. With trembling hands, I opened it to find cryptic entries penned in a hurried, uneven script. The words spoke of betrayal, whispered threats, and a murder concealed beneath layers of silence. As I read, the connection between the diary's grim narrative and the transforming portrait became chillingly clear. Each face the painting assumed was a fragment of the story frozen in time, a silent witness to the crime that had stained Ravenscroft Manor's history. My solitude was broken by a quiet presence. Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper, entered the library with a hesitant expression. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, held a guarded sorrow that softened when they met mine. "You've seen it," she said quietly, as though confirming an unspoken truth. I nodded, closing the diary gently. Yes, the portrait changes at midnight. The faces. They tell a story, don't they? Margaret sighed, her gaze drifting toward the heavy velvet curtains that muffled the storm gathering beyond the manor's windows. "This house holds many secrets, Miss Graves, some better left untouched. But if you are to understand, you must be prepared for the shadows they cast." Her words settled over me like a shroud, yet instead of retreating, I felt a surge of resolve. I was no longer an outsider cataloging dusty relics. I was entwined in a narrative of lies frozen in brushstrokes, compelled to uncover the truth no matter the cost. As the candle flickered violently, a sudden draft swept through the gallery, extinguishing the flame and plunging me into darkness. The shadows seemed to lean closer, whispering secrets lost to time. My pulse quickened, and with a steadying breath, I lit a fresh candle, ready to face whatever revelations the night still held. The midnight hour had unveiled more than faces. It had opened a door into the manor's haunted past, and I was determined to step through it. The heavy oak door creaked open, admitting a gust of cold air that stirred the heavy curtains and sent a shiver down my spine. Standing in the threshold was Dr. Henry Caldwell, the local physician whose reputation for pragmatic skepticism was well known in the village and far beyond. His neat beard and sharp eyes bespoke a man accustomed to confronting the difficult realities of life within steady resolve rather than superstition. Yet as his gaze swept over the dimly lit drawing room, lingering on the shadowed portrait that had become the focus of my obsession, I could tell he sensed the peculiar atmosphere that clung to Ravenscroft Manor like a second skin. "Miss Graves," he said, his voice calm but edged with concern, "I hope the journey here was not too arduous. I understand you have been delving into some rather unusual claims regarding the manor's art collection." I nodded, gesturing toward the portrait that just hours before had seemed to shift before my eyes. "Indeed, Dr. Caldwell, I find myself confronted with a mystery that defies conventional explanation. The subject of this painting changes nightly, as if the brushstrokes themselves harbor secrets beyond the artist's hand." He raised an eyebrow, stepping closer to the canvas. "Such tales often breed fanciful notions. I am here to lend a dose of reason to counterbalance the more imaginative interpretations." Our conversation quickly took on the tone of a spirited debate, his skepticism challenging my every assertion, while I defended the inexplicable with the evidence of my own observations and notes. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, punctuating the tension between us. I could sense his reluctance to fully embrace the possibility of something supernatural, yet there was an undeniable curiosity that urged him to look closer. "You must understand," I explained, tracing a finger over the portrait surface. "The changes are subtle yet unmistakable. Faces emerge and vanish beneath the layers of paint, revealing fragments of a story frozen in time, a narrative intertwined with the manor's dark past." Dr. Caldwell studied the painting for several moments, his brow furrowed. "While I concede that the painting's condition might cause illusions, I remain skeptical of attributing these changes to anything beyond natural causes. Are you certain your mind is not playing tricks in this unsettling environment? The human brain is prone to perceiving patterns where none exist. His words struck a chord of doubt within me, yet they also spurred renewed determination to seek clarity through rigorous scrutiny. Skepticism is a valuable tool, I admitted, but it must not blind us to truths that lie beyond immediate understanding. As night deepened, we sat side by side, the room silent save for the scratching of my pencil, as I sketched the latest iteration of the portrait. Dr. Caldwell watched, his eyes narrowing as if searching for rational explanations in the shifting brushstrokes. The uneasy alliance between us was palpable, two minds wrestling with the same enigma from opposing vantage points. Suddenly, a creak echoed from the hallway, drawing our attention to the shifting shadows that danced across the walls, cast by the flickering candlelight and the myriad paintings that lined the manor's corridors. It was as if the house itself whispered secrets in the language of light and darkness. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Dr. Caldwell nodded, his skepticism momentarily subdued by the palpable sense of foreboding. "This place holds secrets indeed, Miss Graves. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between your conviction and my doubt." In that moment, I realized our quest was not just a battle of beliefs, but a journey into the heart of Ravenscroft's mysteries, where shadows concealed more than mere darkness and brushstrokes bore the weight of frozen lies. The night stretched ahead, fraught with questions and the promise of revelations yet to come. As the candle guttered low, I felt the manor's oppressive atmosphere close in, urging me onward despite the chill that crept through my veins. The painting awaited, its ever-changing visage, a silent sentinel guarding the secrets I was determined to uncover. And with Dr. Caldwell by my side, whether friend or skeptic, I knew the path ahead would test every fiber of my being. But before dawn, the shadows would shift once more, and with them, the truth would inch closer from its hiding place. The game was afoot. The evening air was thick with an unsettling chill as I stepped out into the manor's sprawling gardens, my breath forming faint clouds in the crisp autumn dusk. The towering silhouette of Ravenscroft Manor loomed behind me, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes surveying the grounds. Leaves rustled underfoot, a brittle carpet of decay that whispered beneath my cautious steps. Thomas, the groundskeeper, had appeared beside me almost silently, his presence as sudden as the falling twilight. "Miss Graves," he began, his voice a rough growl it seemed not meant for casual conversation. "This place holds more than just the paintings you came to study. There are things better left unseen, passages where shadows gather and secrets hide." I turned to him, surprised by the gravity in his tone. Thomas was a man of few words. His gruff exterior, often shielding a depth of understanding, I was only beginning to appreciate. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, bore into me as if gauging whether I was prepared for what lay beneath the manor's polished surface. Hidden passages. I asked, curiosity prickling beneath the unease, "What do you mean?" He glanced around, lowering his voice further. "Long ago, before the manor was what it is now, tunnels and secret doorways were built into its very bones. Some were meant for escape, others to hide, things best forgotten." The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint rustle of the ancient oaks that framed the estate. I swallowed, the weight of his words settling heavily on my shoulders. "Will you show me?" I asked, the historian's instinct to uncover truth overpowering the knot of apprehension tightening in my chest. Thomas nodded slowly, leading me back inside through the heavy oak doors that groaned under their own age. The manor's interior swallowed us in shadow, the flicker of candlelight casting long, trembling shapes against the walls. He guided me through corridors I had not yet dared explore, their tapestries faded and footsteps long forgotten. At last, we reached a section of hallway where the stone walls seemed older, rougher, and Thomas pressed a hidden latch beneath a weathered portrait. The panel swung inward with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. "This way," he urged, handing me a lantern whose flame danced nervously against the encroaching black. As we descended, the air grew cooler and damp, a scent of earth and ancient stone filling my lungs. Every step echoed, the silence punctuated only by the distant drip of water. I felt the weight of history pressing in, the walls themselves whispering secrets through the faded brushstrokes of portraits lining the passageway. Faces emerged and dissolved in the lantern's glow, their eyes seeming to follow my every movement, their expressions caught between sorrow and warning. In one alcove, a painting caught my gaze, the brushstrokes blurred unnervingly, the figure's features shifting subtly, as if caught between moments. I reached out instinctively, but the cold stone wall met my fingertips instead. The image was a ghost, a flicker of a truth I was only beginning to grasp. Thomas's voice broke the spell. "These passages have not seen many visitors in decades. Tread carefully. The manor remembers those who wander its depths." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I nodded, steeling myself against the creeping dread. Whatever lay in the shadows below was a piece of the puzzle I had been seeking, a secret chapter in the dark legacy of Ravenscroft Manor. As we continued deeper, I realized the manor was more than a house of cursed paintings. It was a labyrinth of forgotten memories and buried lies, waiting for someone to uncover them. And I was that someone, for better or worse. The echo of our footsteps faded into silence as the passage opened into a hidden gallery, walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed alive, their brushstrokes whispering stories I was desperate to hear. The shadows clung close, and I felt the weight of unseen eyes, watching, waiting. "You must be cautious," Thomas reminded me once more. "Not all who seek the truth find it without cost." I swallowed hard, the flickering lantern light casting my own shadow long and wavering on the cold stone floor. The manor held its breath, and so did I, on the brink of revelation and the darkness beyond. As I traced my fingers along the frames, my mind raced with questions. What crimes and secrets were locked away in these hidden passages? How did they tie to the shifting faces of the cursed portrait upstairs? And most urgently, what price would I pay for uncovering what Ravenscroft Manor so desperately tried to conceal? The answers awaited me in the shadows, and I was determined to find them, no matter the cost. The manor's secrets were beginning to unfold, but with each step, the line between watcher and watched blurred. Ravenscroft was awakening, and I was caught in its gaze. The night stretched on, thick with silence, and the promise of dark discoveries yet to come. The corridor stretched before me, a narrow vein of shadow and flickering candlelight that seemed to pulse with the manor's restless breath. As I paced, the heavy silence was broken only by the soft tap of my boots against the worn wooden floor and the faint rustle of my skirts. Each portrait lining the walls loomed like silent sentinels' faces, frozen in time, yet somehow alive, their eyes glinting in the dim light, and their brushstrokes whispering secrets I longed to decipher. I stopped before one particularly imposing painting, a stern gentleman with a gaze that seemed to pierce the very air between us. The shadows cast by the flickering candlelight played tricks, causing his features to ripple, as if the oil and canvas beneath the varnish were not as inert as they should be. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I forced myself to look away, clutching my sketchpad tighter. Back in my chambers, the candle sputtered and danced, casting long, quivering shadows across the walls. I spread my sketches before me, each page a meticulous study of the portraits I had observed throughout the manor. But something was wrong. Faces I'd drawn with careful precision now seemed subtly altered, the eyes a fraction wider or narrower, lips curling imperceptibly differently when I glanced again. The faces shifted in the periphery of my vision, those brushstrokes alive with a deceptive fluidity. Every time I looked directly, the features appeared fixed, but the moment my gaze wavered, The sketches betrayed an eerie transformation. My heart quickened. Was this a trick of the light, a symptom of exhaustion, or something far more sinister? The manor's oppressive atmosphere pressed in on me, the shadows lengthening and twisting as if alive. I felt watched, not just by the portraits themselves, but by something unseen lurking in the spaces between. A sudden noise, a soft creak from the corridor made me start. I extinguished the candle abruptly, plunging the room into darkness. My breath hitched in the silence that followed. Then, a shadow detached itself from the frame of the portrait across the room, gliding silently along the wall before melting into the blackness of the corner. I blinked, questioning what I'd seen, but the chill lingering on my skin confirmed it was no figment of imagination. The next morning, over a quiet breakfast in the manor's vast dining hall, I sought out Margaret Whitlock. Her presence was a balm to my fraying nerves. She listened intently as I recounted my unsettling visions, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "This manor watches, Miss Graves," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just through eyes painted on canvas, but through shadows and silence. You must tread carefully. There are secrets here that do not welcome the light." Her warning echoed in my thoughts as I returned to my work, the manor's unseen eyes ever upon me. The boundary between reality and illusion blurred with every passing moment, and I realized that uncovering the truth about Ravenscroft would demand more than scholarly detachment. It would require confronting the darkness that watched and waited in every corner. And as the day gave way to night once more, I prepared myself to face the shifting shadows and the lies frozen in time lurking just beyond sight, certain that the manor's secrets were far from done revealing themselves. The weight of history settled heavily on my shoulders as Jonathan and I sat amidst the oppressive silence of Ravenscroft Manor's library. The room was a cathedral to faded grandeur, towering shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and brittle manuscripts, the scent of aged parchment thick in the air. A single candle flickered weakly on the oak table between us, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye, as if the very walls conspired to conceal their secrets. Jonathan adjusted his spectacles, eyes scanning the fragile pages of a ledger that chronicled the Ravenscroft lineage. "Here," he murmured, pointing to an entry dated nearly a century prior, "the family's financial troubles begin to surface. But look here, there are discrepancies, sudden shifts in ownership documents, unexplained absences." I leaned closer, my fingers tracing the faded ink as I absorbed the implications. These were not mere accidents of history. Something deeper lay buried beneath the surface. Could these be attempts to cover something up? I asked, the words tasting like bitter truth on my tongue. Jonathan nodded gravely. "The Ravenscrofts have always been protective of their name, but these records suggest desperation." The manor groaned softly, as if affirming his words. Outside, the wind moaned through the ancient oaks, carrying with it the chill of the encroaching night. Later, in the warmth of the kitchen, I found Margaret. She was wiping down the worn countertops with deliberate care, her movements slow and measured. The glow from the hearth cast flickering light on her weathered face, softening the sharpness in her eyes. "Margaret," I began cautiously, "I've been uncovering some troubling details about the family. I wonder if you might know more about what really happened here." She paused, a shadow crossing her features. "There are things best left forgotten, Miss Graves," she said quietly. "But I suppose you have a right to know." As the fire crackled, Margaret recounted fragments of stories passed down, whispers of betrayal. Betrayal masked by loyalty, and a crime that stained the family's honor. Her voice wavered when she mentioned Isabel, the woman whose portrait haunted the manor's halls. Her fate intertwined with the darkest chapters of the Ravenscroft legacy. I felt the room close in around me, the weight of her revelations pressing upon my chest. The following day, emboldened by these insights, I sought out Lord Alistair. He awaited me in the grand hallway, an imposing figure carved from shadow and austerity. His pale eyes studied me with an intensity that unnerved even my seasoned resolve. "Miss Graves," he said smoothly, "I trust your investigations are proceeding with due caution." His tone was polite, but edged with steel. I met his gaze steadily. "I am uncovering truths that cannot be ignored, Lord Ravenscroft." A flicker of something anger, fear, or perhaps guilt passed through his expression. "Some truths," he warned, "carry consequences heavier than you realize." The echo of his words lingered as I left, the chill of the manor seeping into my bones. That night, alone in my chamber, I sifted through the documents anew, piecing together a tapestry of lies and half-truths. The flickering lamp illuminated cryptic notes and faded photographs, each artifact a brushstroke in the sinister portrait of the manor's past. Outside, the manor breathed darkness and secrets, its shadows stretching like fingers eager to grasp at the edges of my sanity. Yet, despite the dread tightening around me, I felt a fierce determination kindle within. Lord Alistair's desperate attempts to guard his family's name only confirmed that I was close to unveiling something monumental. The question was not if I would uncover the truth, but when and at what cost. As the candle guttered low, I made my resolve. Ravenscroft's shadows might be long and cold, but they would not consume me. Not yet. And with that thought, the manor seemed to settle into a tense silence, as if waiting for the next move in this deadly game of secrets and lies. The air inside Ravenscroft Manor was thick with unspoken truths as I made my way to the drawing room, my mind a tempest of suspicion and determination. The flickering candlelight cast restless shadows that danced on the walls, as if the manor itself breathed unease into the very air. Tonight, I resolved, would be different. I would confront the tangled web of deceit that wrapped itself around these walls and the people who inhabited them. Lord Alistair Ravenscroft awaited me, his tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the heavy velvet drapes. His pale eyes, sharp and cold, met mine with a guarded expression that betrayed nothing. Yet beneath his stoic veneer, I sensed a fragile tension, a thinly veiled desperation to maintain control over his family's legacy. "Lord Ravenscroft," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The stories you've shared about the manor's past, they conflict with what I've uncovered. Why do you persist in obscuring the truth?" His lips twisted into a faint, bitter smile. "Miss Graves, some truths are better left buried. The past is a delicate thing, one that can shatter reputations and ruin lives if mishandled. But the portrait," I pressed, "it holds secrets that demand to be told. Faces shifting beneath the brushstrokes, lies frozen in time. How can you so readily dismiss what is right before us?" He took a slow step forward, his voice lowering. "Because some secrets safeguard the family name. If those shadows were to be illuminated fully, Ravenscroft Manor would crumble into ruin." The room seemed to close in around us, the ornate wallpaper pressing its faded roses and curling vines against the walls, like silent witnesses to this confrontation. I held his gaze, unwilling to be cowed by his threats veiled in civility. Later that evening, I sought out Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper whose warm yet guarded presence had become a reluctant beacon amid the manor's coldness. I found her in the long corridor near the servants' quarters, her gray-streaked hair pinned neatly, eyes sharp and observant, despite the softness in her expression. "Margaret," I said gently, "I need to understand. What is your connection to these events? What do you know that you won't say?" She hesitated, the faintest tremor in her hands betraying her composed demeanor. "Miss Graves, some loyalties run deeper than truth. I've served this family for decades, seen the good and the terrible. There are things I cannot speak of openly, for fear of tearing apart what little peace remains." Her words hung heavy in the cold air. I pressed on, sensing the fragile barrier between her loyalty and the burden of her secrets. "I'm not here to judge, only to uncover." If you have knowledge that can help, I need you to trust me." Margaret's eyes flickered with pain and indecision, the weight of her internal conflict palpable. "Very well," she whispered, "but understand that the path you tread is perilous, and not all who walk it will welcome your search." That night, haunted by Margaret's confession and Lord Alistair's veiled warnings, I retreated to my chamber. The flickering fireplace cast dancing shadows upon the walls, mirroring the storm within me. I clutched my sketches of the shifting portrait, each line, each brushstroke a puzzle piece in the enigma that Ravenscroft Manor had become. Restless, I paced the room, the silence pressing in like a physical weight. My thoughts spiraled, tangled between obsessive pursuit and the gnawing loneliness that had shadowed me since the loss of my mentor. The manor seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the shadows whispering secrets just beyond reach. The following day brought a tense encounter with Dr. Henry Caldwell in the library. His pragmatic demeanor and skeptical outlook often clashed with my theories, yet his presence was a necessary counterbalance to my obsession. "Eleanor," he said, adjusting his spectacles as he regarded my notes, "sometimes the simplest explanation is the truest. You risk losing yourself chasing phantoms in shadows." I met his gaze, undeterred. "And sometimes, Doctor, the shadows hold the very truths we fear to face." His lips tightened. "Be careful you don't let your need for answers blind you to reality." The library's musty scent mingled with the tension in the air, the rows of leather-bound volumes standing like silent judges. Our exchange was fraught, a collision of logic and conviction that left neither of us fully satisfied, but both forced to confront the limits of our understanding. As the day waned, I found myself more isolated than ever. The fractures of trust among the manor's inhabitants widened, each secret and half-truth a stone in the growing wall between us. Margaret's conflicted loyalty complicated my search for allies, while Lord Alistair's cold manipulations remained an ever-present threat. Yet amid the mounting dread, a spark of resolve kindled within me. The lies frozen in time upon the shifting canvas demanded to be unraveled. I would not be deterred, no matter the cost. As I closed my journal that night, the manor settled into an uneasy silence, shadows lengthening and thickening around me. Tomorrow, I knew, would bring new revelations and new dangers. The fractured trust that divided us was only the beginning, and the secrets of Ravenscroft Manor awaited their reckoning. But as I lay awake, the question echoed relentlessly in my mind: who here could I truly trust? The night outside pressed cold and indifferent against the windows, and the ever-changing portrait in the hallway seemed to watch over me with eyes that held 1,000 hidden stories yet untold. And so the game of shadows continued, pulling me deeper into a mystery that refused to yield, where every answer uncovered only deepened the darkness surrounding Ravenscroft Manor. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows across the cluttered study, where Eleanor Graves sat hunched over a collection of sketches that chronicled the eerie nightly transformations of the cursed portrait. Each drawing captured a subtle shift, a changed expression, a different eye color, a new scar, and Eleanor's sharp eyes traced the delicate brushstrokes repeatedly, as if willing them to reveal their secret. The room was thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax, mingled faintly with the musty odor of the manor's ancient timbers. Her obsession had deepened beyond mere curiosity. It was as if the portrait itself were a living puzzle, each face frozen in time, yet whispering tales of betrayal and deceit. Eleanor tapped her pencil against the parchment, contemplating the patterns she had begun to discern. The changes were not random. No, they followed a sequence, a timeline encoded by the artist's hand, a silent chronicle of events that had unfolded within these very walls. The manor was quiet, save for the distant ticking of an ornate grandfather clock and the occasional creak of settling wood. Eleanor's breath hitched as her gaze returned to the latest sketch, a face she had seen only at midnight, eyes shadowed but unmistakably familiar. The realization struck her with a sudden, chilling clarity. The brushstrokes were a code, a cipher hiding the truth about the manor's darkest hour. A soft knock on the door pulled Eleanor from her reverie. Margaret Whitlock entered quietly, the housekeeper's presence a steadying force amid the swirling uncertainty. Her gray hair framed a face lined with decades of service and sorrow, and her piercing eyes flickered with a mixture of sympathy and guarded knowledge. "Miss Graves," Margaret said softly, holding out a faded photograph. "I thought this might help." It was found in the East Wing, hidden in the pages of an old ledger. Eleanor took the photograph reverently, the edges worn and the image faint. It depicted a young woman, her features strikingly similar to one of the faces in the portrait's nightly transformations. The connection was undeniable. This was Isabel Ravenscroft, the manor's tragic mistress, whose story Eleanor had pieced together with increasing urgency. "Thank you, Margaret," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This brings me one step closer." Margaret nodded, the weight of unspoken memories pressing between them. "Be careful, Eleanor. The past here doesn't rest easy." Later that afternoon, Eleanor met with Jonathan Pierce in the manor's dusty archives. The local historian was a steady presence, his enthusiasm tempered by a deep respect for the manor's secrets. Together, they pored over ledgers, letters, and faded newspaper clippings, cross-referencing dates and names with the sketches Eleanor had made. "Look here," Jonathan said, pointing to a sequence of entries detailing a series of tensions within the Ravenscroft family around the time of the murder. These events match the shifts in the portrait, each face representing a key figure caught in the web of deceit. Eleanor's heart pounded as she connected the dots. The portrait was more than a painting. It was a visual ledger of lies frozen in time, each brushstroke a chapter of a crime carefully concealed. The faces were witnesses, their expressions locked in silent testimony. As twilight deepened into night, Eleanor returned to the gallery where the cursed portrait hung. The manor's shadows lengthened, crawling across the polished wooden floor like living things. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the canvas with an ethereal glow. The painting shifted before her eyes, faces melting and reforming in a slow, haunting dance. The air was thick with foreboding. Eleanor felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, the whispered secrets pressing in from every corner. Yet she stood firm, her resolve hardening with each passing moment. The truth was within her grasp, fragile, elusive, but no longer beyond reach. Her fingers brushed the cool frame, and a whisper of a smile ghosted across her lips. The portraits of lies were unraveling, and with them, the dark heart of Ravenscroft Manor would finally be exposed. But she knew the road ahead was perilous. Those who hid behind the shadows would not relinquish their secrets without a fight. The night deepened, and the manor seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor's journey was far from over. The brushstrokes still held many secrets, and the shadows of the past were eager to reclaim their silence. Yet in the shifting faces of the portrait, she found a flicker of hope, a promise that even lies frozen in time could be broken, and truth, no matter how deeply buried, would find its light. And so, with her sketches clutched tightly, Eleanor prepared to delve deeper into the darkness, ready to confront whatever awaited beyond the veil of paint and shadow. The drawing room was colder than usual, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the creeping dusk. I stepped inside with measured caution, the flicker of candlelight casting long, wavering shadows across the high ceiling and the imposing portraits that lined the walls. Each painted face seemed to watch me with silent accusation, their eyes gleaming from the darkness, as if warning me away. Yet I could not turn back now, not after everything I had uncovered. Lord Alistair Ravenscroft stood near the hearth, his tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the firelight. His pale eyes, sharp and unyielding, met mine the moment I crossed the threshold. There was no warmth in them, only a cold, calculated scrutiny that sent a shiver down my spine. The lines etched deeply into his face spoke of years burdened by guilt and ruthless resolve. "Miss Graves," he began, his voice low and steady, "I had hoped your curiosity would wane before it led you too far. This manor holds secrets better left buried." I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. Secrets that the portrait itself refuses to hide. Faces shifting nightly, lies frozen in brushstrokes. "I need to know the truth, Lord Ravenscroft." A bitter smile flickered across his lips, fleeting and unsettling. "The truth," he echoed, stepping closer, the shadows wrapping around him like a cloak. "You must understand the cost of unearthing it. Some stones are better left unturned, some shadows unchallenged." His gaze bore into me, an unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. The manor suddenly felt suffocating, as if the very walls pressed in with the weight of generations of silence. I met his stare, refusing to yield. "I am not afraid. Not of your threats, nor the darkness you guard." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the man behind the mask of coldness cracked. "You know nothing of what I have sacrificed to protect this family, this legacy. The crime you seek to expose will bring ruin, not justice." A sudden creak from the doorway drew our attention. Margaret Whitlock stepped inside, her presence a quiet but reassuring contrast. Her graying hair framed a face marked by years of loyalty and sorrow, and her piercing eyes held a glimmer of understanding. "Lord Ravenscroft," she said softly, "perhaps it is time the truth saw the light." He regarded her with a flicker of something unreadable before turning back to me. "You have allies in unexpected places, Eleanor. But be warned, the manor does not suffer fools lightly." The distant rumble of thunder echoed through the corridors, as if the storm outside mirrored the tempest within. The shadows from the portraits seemed to stir, elongating and twisting on the walls, their silent watch intensifying the oppressive atmosphere. I felt the weight of his words settle heavily in my chest, the threat clear, but my resolve unbroken. "I will see this through," I said quietly, "no matter the cost." With that, I turned and left the room, each footstep swallowed by the manor's eerie silence. The cold grip of fear intertwined with a fierce determination, propelling me onward into the night's uncertain depths. The past was no longer a distant whisper. It was a living, breathing force that sought to consume us all. I knew then that the path ahead would test every fiber of my being. But in the heart of Ravenscroft Manor, amidst the shifting shadows and frozen lies, I was determined to uncover the truth before it was too late. The storm grew louder, rain lashing against the tall windows, and the manor groaned under the weight of its secrets. Yet inside me, a fire burned bright. The confrontation with Lord Alistair had stripped away any illusions of safety or certainty. Trust was a fragile thing here, and betrayal lurked behind every smile. But I would not be deterred. I had come too far, seen too much, to turn away now. The portrait awaited my next visit, its shifting faces promising more answers and more dangers. And as the manor's shadows lengthened, I steeled myself for the revelations yet to come. This night marked a turning point. The past would no longer remain buried in darkness. I would bring it into the light, even if it meant walking through the very fires of Ravenscroft's haunted legacy. The game was far from over. The low glow of the candle flickered against the peeling wallpaper of the servants' quarters, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the cramped room. Eleanor sat opposite Margaret Whitlock, the housekeeper's usually composed demeanor fractured by a tremor in her hands. Between them lay a small, dust-covered wooden box, the edges worn and the lock rusted from years of neglect. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on Margaret, searching for the moment the dam would break. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper as she reached into the box and drew out a single object, a letter, yellowed with age and bound tightly with a black silk ribbon. The paper crackled softly as she untied it, revealing the delicate script penned decades before. "I have kept this hidden for far too long," Margaret said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's time you knew the truth about Isabel, and about me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor leaned closer, her curiosity tempered by the weight of what was to come. Margaret's story began hesitantly, each word a shard of a painful past. She spoke of her youth, a time when the manor was less a prison and more a home, when Isabel Ravenscroft was not just the lady of the house, but a friend and confidant. Isabel was kind, Margaret said softly, but burdened by secrets she dared not share. I was one of the few she trusted, though even I could not fully grasp the darkness that loomed. The flicker of lightning cast stark relief across Margaret's face as she recounted the night everything changed. The manor's cold halls had been witness to a crime so shattering that it silenced voices and froze time itself. Margaret's confession revealed her presence during the event, not as a bystander, but as a silent guardian of a secret too dangerous to tell. "I swore to protect Isabel's memory," she confessed, "and to keep the truth buried so no harm would come to those who remained. But the curse of that night still haunts these walls." Eleanor felt the chill of the manor's shadows creep inward, as if the very air carried the weight of Margaret's words. The housekeeper's revelation shed new light on the portrait that had tormented Eleanor since her arrival. The faces shifting beneath the brushstrokes were not just random phantoms. They were fragments of a story frozen in time, a tapestry of lies and loyalty woven through decades. As Margaret unfolded the layers of her connection to Isabel, Eleanor's mind raced. The housekeeper was more than a custodian of the manor's secrets. She was a living link to the crime that had cursed Ravenscroft. This newfound knowledge altered the landscape of Eleanor's investigation, turning suspicion into empathy and wariness into alliance. The sound of rain pattering against the window pane filled the silence as Margaret reached a trembling hand toward the portrait hanging in the hallway. Together, they stood before the canvas where Isabel's face once shifted nightly in ghostly metamorphosis. Tonight, it was still, her eyes seeming to hold a quiet plea. "Isabel watches over us," Margaret whispered, "and through her, the truth will find its way." Eleanor nodded, the resolve settling deep within her chest. The path ahead was fraught with danger and despair, but with Margaret's trust and the secrets now laid bare, she was one step closer to unraveling the curse that had ensnared Ravenscroft Manor for so long. Yet, beneath the fragile hope lurked a question Eleanor could not shake. With such heavy truths revealed, who could she truly trust, and at what cost would the final reckoning come? As the candle guttered low, the shadows seemed to lean closer, listening to the fragile bond forged in the heart of Ravenscroft's darkest hour. The night was far from over, and the portrait's secret still held its breath, waiting for the dawn. The air in the library was thick with the scent of aged paper and a faint trace of lavender, a ghost of a time long past. Candlelight flickered against the spines of countless books, casting wavering shadows that danced like whispered memories. I sat hunched over a fragile leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. This was Isabel Ravenscroft's diary, or so Margaret had assured me, a precious relic that might finally shed light on the woman whose portrait haunted the manor's grand hall. As I gingerly turned the pages, the delicate script revealed a voice long silenced, but still trembling with emotion. Isabel's words spoke of a life suffused with beauty and dread, moments of joy eclipsed by growing shadows of despair. She wrote of dreams and laughter echoing through these very halls, but also of secrets that clawed at her soul like spectral fingers. The portrait itself loomed silently behind me, its surface restless. I glanced up just as the image shifted again, Isabel's face no longer the serene mask it had been, but a tableau of fear and anguish. Her eyes, once soft and inviting, now glimmered with a haunted intensity, as if pleading to be understood. The brushstrokes rippled subtly, revealing fragments of her story frozen in the paint. Fear, sorrow, a fleeting glimmer of hope. Margaret's voice intruded softly from the doorway, drawing me from my reverie. She entered, her eyes heavy with memories best left unspoken, yet compelled by loyalty to share the burdens she carried. "Miss Graves," she began, settling into a worn armchair beside me, "Isabel was more than the lady in that painting. She was a woman trapped by duty and betrayal, caught in a web spun by those she trusted most." Her words trembled with the weight of years, and I listened as she wove a tale of love and loss, of a promise broken and a trust shattered beneath the cold gaze of Ravenscroft Manor. Margaret spoke of a forbidden liaison, a love that could have freed Isabel from the chains of her noble birthright, and of a secret kept hidden behind closed doors and whispered threats. I traced my fingers over the diary's pages, feeling the pulse of a life extinguished too soon. Isabel's final entries were fragmented, as if penned in haste or desperation. The ink smudged, the script wavering, revealing a woman unraveling beneath the weight of her concealed sorrows. Driven by a sudden impulse, I approached the portrait once more. The air grew colder, the shadows lengthening as if the very walls leaned in to listen. My hand reached out, fingers grazing the ornate frame, and I discovered a barely perceptible seam, a hidden compartment concealed within the woodwork. With careful hands, I pried it open to reveal a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, tarnished by time, and beside it, a lock of dark hair, tied with a faded ribbon. I clasped the locket and felt the weight of Isabel's story pressing upon me, tangible remnants of a past buried beneath layers of paint and secrecy. Margaret's gaze met mine, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and relief. "She never wanted to be remembered, only as a portrait," she whispered. "There was so much more, love, hope, despair, all frozen here, waiting for someone to listen." The discovery unraveled the threads of the manor's dark legacy, revealing the human cost behind the cursed painting. Each shifting face, each brushstroke, was a fragment of Isabel's truth, a silent scream echoing through the halls, demanding to be heard. As the night deepened, I felt the weight of her story settle upon my shoulders. The lies frozen in time were no longer mere shadows on canvas. They were living memories, desperate to escape their prison. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but with Isabel's tale now entwined with my own, I was more determined than ever to unearth the full truth, no matter the cost. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of Ravenscroft Manor, I prepared to follow the shadows deeper still, where art and reality blurred, and the past refused to remain silent. The portrait's eyes seemed to gleam with newfound intensity, as if acknowledging my vow. The first distant rumble of thunder rolled over the hills surrounding Ravenscroft Manor, a deep, rolling warning that stirred the heavy air. I stood by the vast stained glass window of the main hall, watching as thick sheets of rain began to lash against the colored panes, blurring the intricate patterns into watery mosaics. The flickering candlelight struggled against the growing gloom, casting long, erratic shadows that slithered along the walls, draping the portraits in shifting darkness. Each painted face seemed to warp and move in the storm's chaotic light, as if the manor itself breathed with restless unease. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room in stark white, and I caught sight of the portrait's subjects, twisting eyes narrowing, mouths curving into grimaces, features elongating grotesquely. The shifting canvas that had drawn me here was no longer merely haunted. It was alive with accusation. My breath caught in my throat as I felt eyes real or imagined following my every move, the painted faces whispering secrets I was not yet ready to hear. Margaret appeared silently at my side, her presence a small anchor in the growing storm. She offered me a warm woolen shawl, its fabric rough against my skin, but comforting nonetheless. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, despite the soft lines of age, held a mixture of worry and determination. "The storm will not let you leave," she murmured, her voice steady but low, "and neither will the manor." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the ancient window panes and tugging at the heavy curtains as if trying to pry open the house's secrets. The manor's oppressive atmosphere thickened, the shadows stretching longer, deeper, as if reaching out to ensnare me. I wrapped the shawl tighter about my shoulders, steeling myself for what the night might bring. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, muffled by the storm's fury, but unmistakable in the otherwise still air. My heart pounded as I crept toward the library, where the most unsettling portraits hung. The floorboards creaked under the weight of approaching steps, slow, deliberate, and filled with intent. I held my breath, the silence thick and suffocating, broken only by the heavy breathing of anticipation. In this moment, trapped within Ravenscroft's walls by the merciless storm, the line between reality and the supernatural blurred beyond recognition. The paintings no longer merely depicted history, they demanded reckoning. I knew the confrontation with Lord Alistair was imminent, and the shadows whispered that my sanity might be the price. Yet, beneath the dread, a fierce resolve burned within me. I would face whatever darkness the manor held, no matter the cost. The storm's fury outside was nothing compared to the tempest gathering within Ravenscroft Manor, and as the night deepened, so did the secrets and the danger waiting in the shifting shadows. The storm raged with unrelenting fury outside Ravenscroft Manor, as if the heavens themselves were protesting the secrets buried within its ancient walls. Lightning sliced through the sky, illuminating the grand hall in stark, ghostly flashes. Shadows danced and flickered across the portraits lining the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow my every movement. It was the final hour, the moment I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. I stepped forward, clutching the soaked diary to my chest, the pages fragile, yet filled with the damning truth. The very air felt thick, charged with a weight that pressed upon my chest like a vice. Lord Alistair stood before me, his gaunt figure framed by the flickering firelight, his pale eyes gleaming with a coldness that was both a shield and a weapon. "You shouldn't have come here, Eleanor," he said, voice low but resolute. "Some truths are better left buried." His words, laced with warning and menace, only steeled my resolve. "I've seen what your family has tried to hide for generations. The portrait, the lies frozen in time, it's all here," I said, pressing the diary forward. "The truth cannot be erased by shadows or threats." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "You speak as though you understand, but you do not. This matter, this legacy, it is my burden to bear. To protect my family's name, I will do what I must." The room seemed to close in around us. From the corners, the portraits appeared to shift, the brushstrokes rippling like water disturbed by a stone. Faces morphed and twisted, the eyes alive with silent accusation. Isabel's portrait, the cursed canvas that had haunted my nights, loomed above us. Her gaze was sorrowful yet accusing, a silent witness to the crime that had stained Ravenscroft's history. Margaret appeared quietly at my side, her presence a balm against the mounting dread. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, met mine with a shared understanding. The housekeeper's loyalty was a fragile thread I dared not sever. "You are not alone in this," Margaret whispered, her voice steady despite the storm's roar. "Dr. Caldwell," ever the skeptic turned uneasy ally, emerged from the shadows near the doorway, his gaze flickering between Alistair and me. "The manor itself seems to resist the truth," he murmured, "but truth it is nonetheless." Lord Alistair's composure cracked, a flash of guilt, of desperation, betrayed by the flicker in his eyes. "You know nothing of what I have sacrificed," he hissed, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This family's sins are my cross to bear. Leave now, Eleanor, before you lose more than your curiosity." But I would not be swayed. The obsession that had driven me here, the relentless pursuit of a truth frozen in brushstrokes and shadow, surged within me. No, I said firmly. The curse ends tonight. Suddenly, the storm's fury seemed to seep into the manor itself. The shadows from the paintings stretched and writhed, as if animated by the very secrets they concealed. The temperature dropped. My breath formed clouds in the icy air. The manor was alive, a living entity feeding on lies and fear. A tense silence fell, then shattered by thunder that shook the ancient timbers. Lord Alistair's mask of control crumbled completely. You think you can destroy what has lasted centuries? He demanded, voice cracking with rage and pain. This manor, this legacy, it will consume you? I stood my ground, heart pounding in my ears. If it consumes me, it will at least consume the truth with me. In that moment, I understood the full gravity of my quest, the fragile boundary between reality and the illusions crafted by fear, guilt, and obsession. The cursed portrait was no mere painting. It was a vessel of history's darkest secrets, a mirror reflecting the lies that had festered in the shadows for far too long. The confrontation reached its crescendo as the storm outside reached a deafening pitch. Lightning illuminated the room one last time, casting stark light on Alistair's anguished face. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the tempest began to wane, and the shadows receded, leaving the manor eerily silent. Alistair slumped, defeated, and I knew the curse was broken. Yet the cost was clear. Nothing about this night, about Ravenscroft Manor, would ever be the same again. As I stood amid the fading echoes of thunder and shadow, a single thought anchored me. Some truths, though uncovered, remain heavy with the weight of the past, forever casting long, unyielding shadows. And in that knowledge, my journey was far from over. The air in the gallery was thick with anticipation, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows across the portraits that lined the walls. I stood before the cursed painting, its surface calm and still for the first time in weeks, the usual nightly transformations having ceased. Tonight, the portrait bore a single, unchanging face, that of Isabel Ravenscroft, her eyes wide and sorrowful, etched forever in the stillness of the canvas. I took a slow breath, steadying the tremor in my hands as I addressed the assembled household. Lord Alistair, Margaret, Dr. Caldwell, and the few others who had gathered in the great hall. My voice, though quiet, carried the weight of years of investigation and obsession. This portrait, I began, has held within its brushstrokes a secret no one dared speak aloud, a crime buried beneath layers of paint and silence. Tonight, I will reveal the truth that has haunted Ravenscroft Manor for generations. A hush fell over the room. Even the distant rumble of the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the manor itself was holding its breath. I detailed the story I had pieced together, the jealousy, the betrayal, the murder of Isabel Ravenscroft, and how her story had been concealed in the shifting faces of the painting. Lord Alistair's pallor deepened with each word, his pale eyes fixed on me with a mixture of rage and helplessness. When I finished, silence reigned for a heartbeat before Alistair's voice, low and brittle, cut through. You have no proof, Miss Graves. These are merely stories spun from shadows and fear. But Margaret stepped forward, her eyes shining with a fierce resolve. No, my lord, the truth has lived in these walls long enough. It is time to let it breathe. Doctor Caldwell nodded in agreement, his usual skepticism tempered by the undeniable weight of the evidence. The transformations, the diary entries, the hidden passages, they all converge on one conclusion. As the storm outside intensified, a sudden gust of wind swept through the manor, snuffing out several candles. In that moment, the shadows that had clung so tightly to the walls began to recede, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if the manor were exhaling after a long-held breath. The portraits, once seeming to whisper and shift, now hung quietly, their secrets laid bare. Lord Alistair's composure cracked. His gaunt frame trembled as he realized the fortress of lies he had built was collapsing. "You do not understand what you destroy," he hissed. "This manor, this legacy, it is more than a name. It is my duty to protect it. At what cost?" I challenged, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions raging inside. How many lives must be shadowed by silence and fear before truth can live? The room was thick with tension, but the moment marked a turning point. The curse that had bound the painting, and us all, was broken. Yet, as I looked around at the faces illuminated by the fragile candlelight, I knew the price was steep. Later, alone in the quiet of the manor, I returned to the gallery. The storm had passed, leaving a damp stillness in its wake. I traced the fading brushstrokes of Isabel's portrait with trembling fingers, the weight of the revelations pressing down on me like a heavy cloak. The shadows had receded, but they had left their mark on my soul. The victory was bittersweet. I had uncovered the truth, shattered the curse. Yet the cost was etched deep within me, a reminder that some secrets, though finally spoken, never truly leave us. They linger in the spaces between brushstrokes, in the silence of abandoned halls, and in the fragile boundary between art and reality. As dawn crept through the manor's tall windows, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. Ravenscroft Manor was free, but I was forever changed. And somewhere, deep within these walls, the echoes of lies frozen in time would continue to whisper, reminding me that the pursuit of truth is a path fraught with shadows. But I was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. The painting remained still, but I knew its story was far from over. And neither was mine. The manor was no longer a prison of secrets, but a monument to the resilience of memory and the indomitable will of those who seek the light in the darkest of places. And with that thought, I turned away, the morning light casting new shadows, not of fear, but of hope. The manor's silence felt heavier than ever, an almost tangible presence pressing against my skin as I sat alone in the dimming light of the drawing room. The fireplace crackled softly, flames dancing in a slow waltz that cast long, wavering shadows on the wallpaper, shadows that once seemed to harbor secrets, now merely companions to my restless thoughts. I traced the outline of the portrait hanging above the mantelpiece, its surface calm and unyielding, no longer shifting beneath my gaze. The faces frozen in time had finally settled, but the weight of what I had uncovered felt anything but settled within me. I stared at the brushstrokes, now inert and silent, and a cold realization crept over me. The line between art and reality was far more fragile than I had imagined. For so long, I had believed that the canvas was a safe place, a repository of history and beauty, a silent witness to the past. But here, in Ravenscroft Manor, the paintings had become more than mere images. They were vessels of memory, of guilt, of lies etched deep into the fabric of the family's history, and by extension, into my own. The room was still except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock standing sentinel near the doorway. Each tick marked time slipping away, yet I felt trapped in a moment that stretched indefinitely, caught between the relief of the curse's end and the lingering dread of the revelations it had brought. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Margaret entered quietly, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. Her normally guarded expression was softened by a rare, tentative smile. She placed the tray on the side table beside me, the clink of porcelain sharp in the quiet. "You should rest, Eleanor," she said gently, settling into the armchair opposite mine. "The manor has a way of wearing on the soul." I nodded, grateful for her presence. Despite the layers of secrets she had once kept, Margaret had become an unexpected ally, a beacon of warmth amid the cold halls. Her loyalty to the manor and its people was complicated, but beneath it lay a shared desire for peace, if only fleeting. "Do you think it's truly over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her eyes clouding with memories I could only imagine. Some shadows never fully disappear, Eleanor. But perhaps now they rest more quietly. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I thought of the faces that had haunted the portrait, the secrets I had uncovered, and the cost they demanded. My obsession with the truth had driven me to the edge of despair and back, unraveling not only the Manor's past, but parts of myself I had long tried to bury. Moments later, Dr. Henry Caldwell entered through the French doors, his figure silhouetted against the fading light outside. The storm that had raged through the night was finally spent. His eyes, sharp yet weary, scanned the room before settling on the two of us. "The storm's past," he remarked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Perhaps there's hope for this place yet." I looked at him, remembering the many times our perspectives had clashed, his unwavering skepticism against my relentless pursuit of the inexplicable. Yet here he was, a reluctant believer in the shadows that once seemed so easily dismissed. "I suppose the truth has a stubborn way of revealing itself," I said softly. He nodded, stepping closer to the window to gaze out at the clearing sky. "And once it does, there's no turning back." The room felt different now, lighter, yet charged with the residue of all that had transpired. Margaret rose to leave, her presence lingering like a protective talisman. I remained seated, my thoughts drifting back to the portrait, to Isabel Ravenscroft, to the shadows that had whispered their secrets in the dead of night. I reached out and closed the heavy velvet curtains, shutting away the last vestiges of twilight and mystery. For a moment, the Manor felt at peace, as if holding its breath before the dawn. But beneath that fragile calm, I knew the shadows would always linger, not just within these walls, but within me. What remained now was not just the story of Ravenscroft Manor, but the story of what it meant to seek the truth when the cost was so great. I was changed, scarred by the knowledge I carried, haunted by lies frozen in time, yet resolute to face whatever shadows lay ahead. And as the night deepened, I understood that some mysteries never truly end. They merely wait for the next curious soul, brave enough to uncover them. The fire dwindled to embers, and I leaned back, eyes closing briefly as the weight of the past and the uncertain promise of tomorrow settled over me. Ravenscroft was no longer just a place of darkness. It was a testament to the fragile, haunting dance between reality and illusion, between memory and forgetting. And I was bound to it, forever changed, forever watchful. The truth was out, but the shadows, as always, would endure. The morning light was a pale wash against the heavy gray sky, filtered through rain-streaked glass that blurred the outlines of the sprawling gardens below. I sat by the bay window of Ravenscroft Manor, the damp chill of the recent storm still lingering in the air, the muted sounds of dripping leaves and creaking timbers the only companions to my restless thoughts. After all that had come to pass, the revelations, the confrontations, the curse broken, I found myself caught in a liminal space, suspended between what was and what might yet be. The weight of the Manor's legacy pressed upon me still, as did the shadows of my own past, those ghosts I had long sought to keep at bay. My fingers traced the faded wood of the window frame absently as I wrestled with the familiar internal tug of war, the pull of grief and mistrust that had shaped much of my life, and the fragile hope that perhaps here, among these fractured souls and haunted halls, something new might take root. It was then that Margaret entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the worn carpet. The housekeeper's presence was a balm. I hadn't realized I needed her steady calm, a contrast to the storm that had raged both outside and within these walls. "You look lost in thought, Miss Graves," Margaret said gently, settling into the high-backed chair beside me. Her graying hair caught the light, framing a face marked by years of quiet endurance, eyes sharp and ever watchful. I sighed, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly. "I suppose I am. There's so much to process." So many truths I never imagined I'd face. And yet, the hardest part is feeling like I'm still alone in it. Margaret nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. You're not alone. None of us are, truly. The Manor's shadows have a way of binding us together, whether we like it or not. But sometimes, those shadows can also keep us from seeing the light. Her words stirred something within me, a flicker of warmth amid the cold uncertainty. We talked then of loss, of loyalty, of the tangled web of secrets that had ensnared us all. Margaret's guarded demeanor softened as she shared fragments of her own pain, the sacrifices she'd made to protect the family she'd served for decades. It was a confession not easily given, and I felt the fragile thread of trust stretched taut between us. Later that afternoon, Dr. Henry Caldwell joined me for a walk through the overgrown garden paths, the air crisp and freshly washed by rain. His skepticism had softened in recent days, replaced by a cautious curiosity that mirrored my own evolving perspective. As we strolled beneath the skeletal branches, our conversation shifted from scientific reason to the inexplicable phenomena that had surrounded us. I won't deny there are things here that defy easy explanation, Caldwell admitted, his breath visible in the cold air. But that doesn't mean we surrender to superstition. We must seek understanding, not fear. I looked at him, appreciating the steadiness he brought to my tempestuous mind. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between reason and belief, between what we see and what we feel. Our shared acknowledgement forged a new alliance, one built not on certainty, but on the willingness to confront the unknown together. It was a tentative step toward healing, not only for the Manor, but for ourselves. That evening, in the quiet sanctuary of the Manor's library, I found myself sketching again, the familiar motion grounding me, as Margaret and Dr. Caldwell watched in companionable silence. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the room, mingling with the faint echo of secrets long buried. Here, amid the fading light and the weight of history, I sensed a fragile solidarity blossoming. As the shadows lengthened and the Manor settled into night, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps, after so much darkness, a new understanding could emerge. One that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. One that embraced the complexity of human frailty and the possibility of redemption. But even as hope stirred within me, a quiet question lingered at the edge of my mind. Could I truly overcome the scars of my past and trust those who now stood beside me? Or would the shadows of Ravenscroft continue to cast their long, unyielding reach? The answer awaited us all in the days to come, as the fragile threads of trust and truth wove themselves into the final tapestry of Ravenscroft Manor's story. For now, I held on to the promise of this new understanding, fragile though it was, a beacon amidst the lingering dusk. The morning light seeped softly through the stained glass of Ravenscroft Manor, painting the grand foyer with fractured hues of amber and crimson. The oppressive heaviness that had wrapped itself around the walls, the paintings, and the very air seemed to ebb away, replaced by a fragile calm. I stood there for a long moment, the echoes of the past weeks pressing against my mind like a storm long past but never fully dissipated. The Manor was silent now, save for the gentle creaks of settling wood and the distant call of a lone bird outside. The night's tempest had left its mark, washing away the oppressive shadows that once seemed to crawl from every corner. Yet, as I took a tentative step forward, the weight of everything uncovered, the lies, the pain, the betrayals clung to me like a second skin. Margaret appeared quietly from behind the staircase, her familiar presence both comforting and sorrowful. In her hands, she held a small folded letter, yellowed with age and worn at the edges. "For you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes, sharp and piercing despite the lines etched by time, held a depth of emotion I had never seen before, a mixture of grief, relief, and a reluctant farewell. I unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The handwriting was delicate yet firm, penned by a hand long silenced, but whose words now demanded to be heard. It spoke of love and loss, of secrets buried beneath the manor stones, and of a hope that truth might one day set them free. Margaret's confession in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been a keeper of more than just the hearth and home. She was a guardian of Ravenscroft's fractured soul. "I never wanted you to carry this burden alone," she murmured. "But now it's yours to bear." The weight of her trust settled heavily on my shoulders. It dawned on me then that the shadows within Ravenscroft are not merely those cast by flickering candlelight or shifting brushstrokes. They were the shadows of human hearts, of choices made and undone, of lies frozen in time that refused to thaw. Later, on the manor's veranda, Dr. Henry Caldwell stood beside me, his usual skepticism softened by the ordeal we had shared. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and yet irrevocably altered. He offered a rare, genuine smile, a gesture that spoke volumes of the tentative peace we had reached. "You are right to trust the shadows," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the distant tree line where the first buds of spring began to stir. "Sometimes what we dismiss as illusion hides the deepest truths." I nodded, the irony not lost on me. The very thing I had sought to unravel, the elusive intersection of art and reality, had reshaped my understanding of both. The manor, its paintings, and the lives entwined within its walls had shown me that truth was seldom pure or simple. It was a mosaic of light and darkness, of trust and betrayal, of memory's fragile hold on the past. As I gathered my belongings to leave, the manor seemed to watch me with a silent, knowing gaze. The portraits, once so vivid and alive with their cursed transformations, now hung still and somber, their eyes reflecting a quiet resignation. The curse had lifted, yet the stories they bore remained etched in their brushstrokes, a testament to lives shadowed by secrets. I paused at the iron gates, the cold metal cool beneath my fingers. Behind me, the manor's silhouette stood stark against the pale sky, its grandeur diminished but unbroken. The shadows that had once threatened to consume all who dared seek the truth receded into the folds of history, but I knew better than to believe they were gone entirely. Some lies, though frozen in time, cast long shadows that lingered in the corners of memory and whispered in the silent spaces between breaths. As I stepped away from Ravenscroft Manor, a part of me remained tethered to those shadows, bound by the knowledge I had uncovered and the price I had paid. Yet, amidst the lingering unease, there was also a resolute determination. The past could not be changed, but the future, my future, was mine to shape. I would carry the lessons of Ravenscroft with me, a reminder that truth was a fragile light in the darkness, and that sometimes, to find it, one had to walk through shadows. The gates closed behind me with a final, echoing clang, and the manor disappeared from view. But the portrait's secret, the whispers of the past, and the shadows receded would forever remain etched within me. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the land, I took a deep breath and stepped forward into the uncertain dawn. "There is no forgetting," I whispered to the wind, only learning to live with the shadows. And with that, I vanished into the morning light, forever changed, forever watchful, forever a seeker of truth in a world built on lies frozen in time.